class. My name is Kyle Lundy, and today I'll be going over my ethical dilemma presentation. Within this presentation, I'll be going over the ethical decision-making process and what that looks like from start to finish. So thank you for joining me today, and with that, we'll jump right in. So the video I decided to go with for my situation is called Whose Records? And this is from Pearson, and there's no set date for this video. But in this counseling session within the video, the client is expressing a deep need to move on to a different counselor. She believes that she's not getting the help she needs, that she's not being treated the way she wants, and that she thinks it's going to be best to terminate this relationship and move on to something new. Prior to departure, she's stating that she wants to have full access to all her records, not just her personal records, but also my notes and the notes of previous counselors that she's had. It's important to know that she's been in and out of the counseling process with other counselors prior to myself. That being said, let's go through step one as we work our way through this process. And the first step is identifying the problem. So the main problems that I found was that clearly the counseling session isn't working. Something's wrong either between myself and my performance, or something's going on between the client and maybe some things that she's going on personally. But regardless, the counseling session isn't working the way it needs to. The other problem is that she's trying to gain access to her records. And while that may seem cut and dry, the fact that she wants to have access to my personal notes that I've taken along the way throughout our sessions, as well as the notes from previous counselors, may cause a concern. Some secondary problems that come to mind are obtaining those records from previous counselors and the complications that might come with that. Secondly, the idea of, can this therapeutic relationship be restored? Is there some sort of underlying issue where this relationship has to be terminated, or is there a chance that there may be some redemption here? And then lastly, is there some sort of cycle that's present where there's a constant renewing and termination of counseling sessions? Is there an underlying theme, if you will? Another part of step one for identifying the problem is looking at what I found to be the three main areas of concern, the three focuses. And that is ethical, professional, and technological. And what I'm getting at is all of these are the problems in nature. So for ethical, is it ethical to share all of my notes with the client when it may cause harm to them if they take things out of context? It's professional because is there a right as someone who's receiving services for her to have full access to these things that I'm saying and the personal notes that I've taken? And then lastly, technological. If I were to reach out to previous counselors in order to get their notes and have them share her information, there'll be a lot of loopholes to jump through, and there may be some concerns of confidentiality as well as privacy with sharing information over the internet. And then lastly, who this problem and what this problem relates to. So myself, because I have to decide whether to give access or not, and then the idea, as I mentioned earlier, of I have to look at myself and ask, am I providing competent counseling? How do we get to this point? 2, the client. Do they have right to access full notes without any blocking or walls in the way? And then again, is there a pattern of destructive behavior that's underlying? 3, the previous counselors. If I do follow through with trying to get full notes, I have to reach out to them, and that's going to be its own interaction in itself as I work through that process. And then lastly, it's interacting with technology. Again, is there a safe way to transmit all this important and confidential data over a computer system without any compromise to confidentiality or privacy? So, the second step is to look through the regulations that are out there presently concerning the topic. So what I've found from my state code, and this is Connecticut, again, this is Connecticut General Statutes of Professional Counselors, 2022, and what they state is that disciplinary actions can be taken against counselors on the grounds of negligent, incompetent, or wrongful conduct and professional activities. According to the Connecticut Certification Board 2022, counselors shall not act outside of generally accepted practices. Moving on to federal codes, Title 42, Rule 812G, according to the Federal Codes 2022, states that counselors must maintain confidentiality of patient records at all times. Moving on to the ACA Code of Ethics and what they have to say. And this is from 2014, the rules that were established. So Rule B6E states that there needs to be a standard of reasonableness, or reasonableness of access, if you will, to records. And the focus there is not to cause harm as you are allowing certain access to certain records. B6H says to take special consideration when disposing or terminating records. And this comes into play with previous counselors. Did they dispose these records that she's looking for? Did they terminate the process effectively? Rule B3E talks about counselors taking precautions when transmitting confidential information. And there's certainly going to be some precautions that need to be taken as I reach out to counselors if that's the decision I decide to go with. So, step 3, looking through the nature and dimensions of the issue. So the 3 applicable moral principles that I found, looking at Daniel 2020 and the definitions of each of these issues, this is what I came to terms with. So first and foremost, there's an issue with autonomy. I believe this is not only the first thing on my list, but also the first thing in this dilemma. It takes priority. This client believes that she needs to move on to something different. She's making a decision for herself, and the idea of autonomy comes into play because it is my job as a counselor to facilitate what's best for her. Is this a time where I step in and try to exert what I believe is right, or do I allow her to make this decision to get the notes that she wants and move on to something better? So the idea of what's best for the client is really at play here. Secondly, non-maleficence. I need to ensure that if I do give her notes, that I'm not causing harm in that process. I need to be sure that my actions and my words, because she's clearly distraught, as I follow through this process, that I'm being careful with how I present myself and how I present information going forward. And thirdly, veracity. So with veracity, it's important that I'm truthful in this process. And what does truth actually look like? Is it giving her all the notes? Is it confining some to make sure that her perception of truth doesn't get mixed up in all this as she reads through some of the things that I've said? There's a lot of pieces at play here, but these are the 3 that I believe played the most in this. So here's what the experts have to say. So according to Geisinger, 2019, he did a study on the idea of vulnerability within children and adults when it comes to ideas of autonomy and independence. And the underlining theme here is that as a client goes through the process of working through issues and being and opening up to counselors, they have immense vulnerability. And so I take that as I'm working through this specific situation, I need to recognize that this client is seeking autonomy. She is seeking something to work through, trying to come to best terms with herself, and she's extremely vulnerable in this time, and I need to be aware of that. Secondly, Von Kahn and Kumar, 2020, did a study on the importance of consent and accessing personal records, and they found that informed consent was being given prior to displaying medical records within the court of law, but the issue was that the client wasn't fully aware, or they stated they weren't, as they were giving consent to the access of these records that were being used against them in court. And so the idea behind that is that it is the client's right to have personal accountability over their records. It is their right, there is an ownership there, and I need to make sure as the counselor that I'm acknowledging that and saying that that's important to me as well. So, in order to move forward, the professionals that I believe would be important to consult as I work through this process are my colleagues. Maybe some have gone through the same process as me or dealt with similar situations. If I have a supervisor at this time, they're going to know my strengths and weaknesses. They're going to be able to advise me on a good way that I should go. As well as the Counseling Certification Board, American Counseling Association. These organizations are very important. There's a lot of smart people that are beyond me in experience and in years, and that's plenty of knowledge that I can pull from in order to decide how to make a good decision and what to work through. So, all that being said, step 4 for the potential courses of action. Here's what I've outlined for you today. So, the first one would be to deny client access entirely to my notes. And the reason why I stated this was according to Rule 6 B6E from the ACA Code of Ethics 2014, like I mentioned earlier, is the idea of a sense of reasonableness when providing access to notes. I could fall back on this in the sense that I want to make sure I'm not causing harm by giving her my notes. So if I don't give her any, then I'm not causing any harm, right? But we'll find out next in the next slide. So the second part, for giving the client full access to my notes. That is an option. Do I give her full access? Show her my personal notes, all records, reach out to previous counselors, the whole 9 yards. According to Daniel and the definition of veracity, working through that, what I came to terms with was that would be an idea or a sense of being truthful and being faithful with the client. by not having any exposed walls. Next, I could vet the notes to the client, decide which ones I want to share with her, and then go over the informed consent that we had gone over at the very beginning of the therapeutic relationship. Falling back on themes such as, you stated that you wanted the service, I said I would give it to you, and it falls within these parameters. This is why I took the notes I did, and why it might be dangerous to give you some of these notes back, because they may be taken out of context. So work through that process with her. Again, I saw that from Daniel 2020 as falling under veracity and having that truthfulness. And then number 4 would be to vet the notes while focusing on empathy. And I used Remley Jr. and Harley 2020 as the resource for this, because in our textbook that we've been working through with this class, empathy is a major theme that gets bounced on multiple times. It's something that we need to make sure that we're hitting on the head, and that's something that we're living by. So, potential consequences for each of the actions. I decided not to go with the first one because denying access would maybe prevent immediate harm, but it's going to cause long-term harms. There's also legal implications of denying her access to what she really has the right to. Secondly, if I give her full access to my notes, this isn't a good idea either, because even though I'm allowing her to feel autonomous and that she's getting what she wants, if she has full access to my notes and the notes of other counselors, she really may have harm caused upon her by misinterpreting these notes or taking them out of context, and that can cause some issues as well. The third one I thought was a good idea because not only you're vetting notes and being smart, or that's a good decision, but also because we're falling back on common ground. Going back to the beginning and remembering how we got into this relationship in the first place. And then lastly, I thought that was a reasonable decision because it is, again, important to emphasize empathy while also vetting the notes and ensuring that I'm helping you through this process while not causing any harm. I think there's a lot of room for understanding and healing also with this option. So that's the option I decided to go with, both 3 and 4 combined. So that includes vetting the notes to the client, focusing on empathy throughout the whole process, and going over informed consent. So at this time, as I evaluate the course of action, I do not believe any ethical dilemmas still exist. But according to Forrester, Miller, and Davis, 1995, there's still some tests I need to go through. So that includes the test of justice. I believe that this decision is fair. It's fair to the client because they are practicing autonomy. They are able to get what they sought out for, but also I'm protecting myself in the process. For the test of publicity, I believe that if this decision were to be made public, I would be able to fall back on it. I don't think I made any wrong decision or did anything unethical in this process. And for the test of universality, if someone were to come up to me or a colleague and go through something similar, I believe I would be able to suggest the same thing. So how I'm going to implement this, again, I'm going to reach out to all those agencies and the personnel that I talked about to ensure that I'm falling back on a wealth of knowledge before going forward in the process. I'm also going, for step 2, to talk to her previous counselors for some continuity, to see maybe some underlying issues that need to be addressed or how I can best meet her needs by understanding her a little bit better throughout the whole counseling process, not just with me, but with previous counselors. 3 would be to look through my notes and truly vet what would cause harm and what wouldn't, being careful as I go through. 4 would be able to look through my informed consent that I'd given her in the beginning of the relationship and ensuring that I understand it well so I can explain it well. Then next step would be setting up the counseling session with the client to discuss the action plan. 6 would be meeting with the client. Then I would decide next to continue or terminate the therapeutic relationship. And that falls on Forrester and Miller and Davis, 1995, because there needs to be some sort of conclusion that comes with the process. So that's why I fell back on that. And we're coming to conclusion. Lastly, I would give the vetted notes, whatever the decision, and follow through with it. I would know it's going to work because the client's going to have elated feelings, that you're going to see that they're satisfied with the process and they feel that they're justified, and that I'm coming away without having caused any ethical violations. And I'm going to continue to be careful and vigilant as I assess for potential consequences in the future, making sure I'm looking out for that. So with that, here are my references to my presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through with me, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.